Hey, son. Peace, peace to whoever might be out there. Right here, got to knock out a discussion post before in the next 20 minutes. So should be okay though. I just did some reading. probably take out the yeah. Man, that Grammarly be alright, boy. As described in Amy's lecture, scholarly communication paints a picture of culture, business, and politics. From the communication cycle to the communication itself, it is apparent that coming from a public librarian background, academic libraries are a different world. However, this foreign terrain interests me. I have described myself as a public academic librarian in the sense I have academic proclivities with the purpose of connecting academic fervor to public environments. Your boy is nice, nigga. Fuck you, mean. Your boy is nice. All right, about 10 minutes. Hmm. I don't know how I want to describe that. Tree. Basically saying the same thing twice. I don't even do that. I know this is not a paper, y'all. Chill out. Before midnight, my boy. Hey, boo. Cool.
Qualitative research looks for non-numerical aspects. It can be, and it's usually more verbal, so questionnaires that are based on interviewing participants. It's not the only way. Some aspects such as observation, photographies, collages of photography is one way to actually conduct this research. The analysis of that data becomes a little tricky, so it's not as easy. Just, I'm going to take a bunch of photos and that's my research. Connected phenomena in terms of author's popularity. So we are establishing here the independent variable. Have that one table that is validity basically means, did you identify, find the same? Shows which ones of those two actually show, but the group already exists. So first graders in group 1 will be used as the control. So those are going to be left in the classroom doing work all day with no breaks. And first grade group 2 will receive the experimental design, which is actually giving them a 1-hour recess. And we do the same. We collect data before, data after, but we have 2 different groups. And then we compare how the test moved between both of them. This is what is called a 2-2 grid design, because I had 2 groups and I'm going to collect data. The X's and the O's are just general recess. Another thing about actual experiments is the logic behind experiments. So they actually rely a lot on controlling a factor by assigning individuals to specific groups. So I control for who has recess versus who doesn't have recess by creating 2 groups. One has a 1-hour recess, one has 0 hours. They just go through the day. One group receives the treatment that is known as the experimental group. In the example of fatigue in school children, and having a 1-hour recess, the ones that actually go into 1-hour recess are the experimental group. The one that doesn't is known as the control group. So those are easy ways to identify experiments. They have this design. Another thing is, what types of experiments do we do? Because this whole thing of just having 2 groups is not necessarily what always happens. We actually have 4 types of, or general families of experiments. We have pre-experimental designs, we have quasi-experimental designs, we have what is called true experiments, and we have those that we call single subject design. A pre-experimental design actually just studies one group. How do we do that? So we might gather data before the intervention, then have the intervention, and then gather data from the same group after the intervention. So in the recess example, we can actually define characteristics that we're going to have about fatigue. So we can actually give all of the students in the school a test or a survey, asking them how fatigued do they feel. Then actually giving all of them a 1-hour recess, and then gathering another survey, most likely the same survey, after the recess, and actually keeping track of the scores, how individuals or general average scores for each one of the questions to determine the level of fatigue. I'm here doodling. So the S is for survey, the F is for fatigue. The X's and the O's are just general, and I think I have them backwards. Actually, interventions are done with an X. So that is the pre-experimental design. We just study one single group, and we gather data from them at 2 different points in time. We also have what is called a quasi-experiment. A quasi-experiment would be the one that I previously explained. It's the one that actually uses a control and an experimental group, but it doesn't randomly assign the participants to each group. So this would be like, when I was in school, there was always 2 groups. So there was first grade 1, first grade 2, because there were a lot of us in town. So it would be predetermined. you already have two groups. They're not exactly the same number of students, of children in one group versus the other, but the group already exists. So first graders in group one will be used as the control. So those are going to be left in the classroom doing work all day with no breaks. And first grade group two will receive the experimental design, which is actually giving them a 1 hour recess. And we do the same. We collect data before, data after, but we have two different groups. And then we compare how the test moved between both of them. This is what is called a 2-2 grid design, because I had two groups and I'm going to collect data at two different times looking at two um, outcomes. So already existed. Really, this is we also have what is called a cohort study. So cohort study is a type of longitudinal study. A longitudinal study actually is the kind of study approach that follows research participants over a time period. So it's opposite to cross-sectional. I'm going to say CS. Cross-sectional, which can be a trend study can be cross-sectional, means that I gather data from one group at one time, and that is it. In a cohort study, I actually do what is called a longitudinal type of study in which I go in and gather data at multiple points in time. As you might have guessed, cohort studies and any type of longitudinal study is much harder to plan because you have to go and gather data from the same individuals in different points in time. It can be once and twice, or it can be multiple points in time. So let's say that I want to see what is the level of use for the school library among high schoolers. And so I create a survey, and I administer that survey to freshmen. Then when they start their sophomore year, I go back and I give them the same survey. And then on their third year, I go back when they're juniors and I give them the same survey. And then as seniors, I give them the same survey before they start. And then after or at graduation, when they're about to graduate, I give them the same survey. That would be a cohort study. And I gather data at 4 different points in time. Cohort studies, usually you keep track not only of the group and report data about the group, you also report data about the evolution from individual to individual. So it requires a lot of patience, a lot of planning, and a lot of tracking of the data. Another type of research that I can do, or survey that I can do, is called a parallel sample study. So the study in which 2 or more groups of participants receive different interventions. So it's not an experiment because I'm not the one controlling what they're going to be receiving or not. But I can actually study a group of library users and a group of non-library users and actually create a survey about the uses of or awareness of misinformation in the media. And I give it to library users, and I give the same survey to non-library users. There's 2 groups. One is library users, one is non-library users, and they receive the same intervention. They receive the same survey. I gave them the same survey, but they have a characteristic that is different among both of them. So that is called a parallel sample study, and that can be done easily with a survey. Then I have what I was mentioning before, the cross-sectional study, which we do most of it. Like 98% of the surveys you will see out there in library and information science literature, the ones who actually gather data and are kind of empirical studies, they actually did a cross-sectional study. The cross-sectional study is a type of observational research that analyzes data of variables collected at one given point in time across the sample population. And the sample population can be defined in various ways. We will talk about that when we talk about survey sampling. So again, what is the most commonly used form of survey in library and information science? The cross-sectional study. Um, the other ones, they also exist and they have their value, each one of them, but they're not as popular. Require a little bit more planning and they can be a little bit complicated. Oops, sorry. So that is it for this presentation on quantitative research methods. Remember, the most common forms of research in quantitative methods are actually experiments and surveys. We will be studying along in further into the actual ways in which we